because this is the only way he can get to reach the people. And so each and every one of you in here today, as sisters and brothers, when you leave here today, you have a responsibility to carry this information another step. Share it with another individual. And that, I think, is the least Dr. Ben can ask you to do. I remember there were times when both himself and Dr. Clark would reflect that after they're gone, who's going to continue the work? Fortunately, we've had a whole new generation of young sisters and brothers who've come up and are willing to take the fight to another level. Of course, if we can get some of our cousins on the street corner tightened up, we'll be able to do a lot more. And that's our responsibility. Each and every one of us may live in such a neighborhood where it's difficult to make contact with the young bloods. But we have to find a way to get to them. Because sooner or later, this system will consume them and destroy them. They don't know it, but it will. So the reason why I'm giving you this information about Dr. Ben is for you to see him not only someone who gives lectures, but someone whose life is exemplary and dedicated to one thing. That's African liberation, unification, and above all, Africans standing up in this world with power. That's his responsibility. Now, I can't speak for him. I'm not attempting to do that. I'm just attempting to give you some insights into the man.
To the extent to which mine has been raised. But it is the amount of conditions that you take along with you constantly that makes the stresses be very high. In dealing with these stresses, I ask myself many times, and this happens quite frequently, when are you going to stop? And I come up with a lot of answers, and none of the answers is ever satisfying because I don't stop. But in another sense, it's very good to be asking yourself, when are you going to stop? And the reason for that is you're conscious of the fact that you're not an forever moving machine. And since there is an aspect in you constantly reminding you that a time for stopping is also part of your plan, then you could see around the wall that much better. Last evening I had a great opportunity to re-examine some of the positions I take, but in particularly one. And one is a re-examination of the format of all that made Sudan, in my understanding of the continent of Africa, what made Sudan the magnificent place it is by virtue of the fact that I'm no longer going there, at least not for quite some time, yet it became very dominant what it means to the rest of all the other program I know about that area of Africa. I'm not going to go over that tonight, but what I'm going to deal with is bordering very closely as if I was going to end my lecture on Sudan this evening, and that would be the rest of Africa. I hope that is not the case. But examining this aspect of Africa that includes the final ending of Sudan in terms of what's going on now should not surprise you at all. I said that is if you understood me quite well in all these years I have been lecturing and what we know as Sudan. But in all the years that I have been lecturing about Sudan, I have not been able to deal with Sudan in 1/3 as well as I have dealt with Egypt. I have not been able to deal with any place as much as I've dealt with Egypt. And that is tragic. It is tragic in that we have so much coming from Sudan that is today called Egypt. We are not in a position to correct as we should be correcting them. And why? The why can be summed up as the why in Egypt, Ethiopia, and or Sudan. Why aren't we doing it? We're not doing it because of a number of reasons. First of all is the attempt to make us know as little about Sudan as we did know on the surface, much less what we do know in the background. We were taught very little about Sudan because had we known about Sudan, then we will know the entirety of the Egyptian history. And if we knew that about Sudan, it will free our mind to look at Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt, Meroe, Tanubia, and all these other places that are named and others yet to be named, and we would have had a much better understanding of that area covered by the bodies of the Nile water. It is not accidental on the part of the European, however, that we do not know anything about Sudan. We were not told for specific reasons. The Europeans wanted us not to know much about Sudan. Had we known much about Sudan, then we would have been equally aware of the great importance of Sudan to the progress of the continent of Africa as a whole. And through the years, while I screamed to the best of my knowledge about what's going on in Sudan in order to protect ourselves against the tragedy, all the hell breaking loose throughout the continent would have a constant source of operation in Egypt. But because we were not able to get our information coming through the Sudan, we therefore could not put up the kind of resistance movement we needed in Egypt. We forgot while we were able to keep a consistent and persistent struggle against the Western world, with being able to raise the issue constantly from our information points in Sudan, made it possible that the African movement was able to continue as long as it did. We treated the Sudan as if it was exempted from our knowledge of Africa. And when we spoke of things African, we would always include Egypt and never Sudan. Stop and think for a moment what it meant. In order to speak of Kenya, the Kenya resistance movement, all of us spoke of it in terms of what the English said the Kenyan resistance movement was. We knew that it was a quote-unquote Mau movement. And the term Mau movement came from only one source, the British. Because the Africans never referred to themselves in terms of Mau Mau. Mau Mau was given to us by the British, but never did you hear a single African here, even if he was from Kenya, he adopted the movement of Mau Mau and spoke to us as coming from Mau Mau. The reason for that being, again, I come back, is because the continuum that was to connect those of us in Sudan with those of us in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and then in Egypt, was never affected in the right manner. And so we could delay the action of the movement by not having the correct connection. It allowed us not to be able to project our effective damage to the colonial system. By so doing, we were unable to transfer to the African people what damage was being done to our movement by the absence of the Sudanese struggle in the open. Right now, the proof of the matter is there. Right now, 20-odd years after independence movement in West Africa, still we are not sure of what's going on in Sudan. If there is one thing you could ask us, we have been dealing quite recently with a situation that's going on in South Africa. And much of what is going on in South Africa is dependent upon what's going on in Sudan. And because we have not dealt with that, we are unable to come to grips with what should have been taking place in South Africa. As a result, the South African situation is aborted. Not finished. It's aborted. And it's aborted with intent to finish at a particular time. The issue of South Africa will come back. And when it comes back to the table for a definite conclusion by the Africans, which will be worse than anything we have seen thus far, will come back with all the appendages that South Africa was supposed to be finished in Sudan, that was not finished. And it's going to be the fault of most of us, if not all of us, who deals with Africa, to have not dealt with Africa finally in a manner whereby we could have come to our people with open arms, demanding more to fight the European and win, defeat the European totally, but we were not able to fight Sudan. Now, how do you tie this up, you will say to me? What does it mean if I stop at Sudan? Below Sudan, south of Sudan, we have many nations before we come to South Africa. Quite true. There's no doubt about that. But the issue is, of all the nations you have south of Sudan, the reason you are not able to completely destroy the problem of Sudan further in South Africa is because you were unable to know facts that went on in that area. For instance, you knew very little about what goes on in Zimbabwe today. Therefore, you could not culminate anything at all going on in Ethiopia. As a result of that, the man from Ethiopia who left Ethiopia and went now to live, who had no country in Africa to accept him, who sold Africans. Everybody's talking about the Sudanese did this to the Africans, or the Sudanese this to another Sudanese, and their slavery in Sudan and so forth. Did not once ask the question, what is the role of the Sudanese with respect to the Africans who are now they're now in Israel, because we did not understand the role of Sudan in playing the issue in Africa. That man, Mengistu, is now in the south of Sudan, in a place they call what? What is south of Sudan? You do what used to having fun?
Khartoum.
No. What is south of Sudan?
South of Sudan.
Nobody? Zimbabwe. All right. This is what I'm speaking about. Had we known about what goes on in Sudan, we would have been able to cut off people like Mengistu. But we took an attitude about Sudan. It was a matter of the Muslim fighting against someone else. In the case of Sudan, it was the Muslim fighting the Christians in the south. But there was nothing else we were interested in, and we did not want to be involved with any spiritual struggle in the continent. We always had this as an escape mechanism. We could do anything in Africa and avoid it by ignoring it. We avoided things constantly by ignoring them, particularly when it dealt with religion. And we are doing it now. If the issue comes, the question of Christianity versus Islam, or Christianity versus something else, or Islam versus something else, when the issue is religion, we run and escape it, because we do not want to become involved in any problem involving religion. But it's still there. It never goes any place. We don't want to make any decisions based upon religion, yet religion is our worst problem.
That's right.
It is the problem in which we cannot escape. And the reason for it being, we are too lazy to make a decision. And we're afraid to make decisions. Either because our parents still hangs on it, or our present reservation about it, or our present girlfriend, boyfriend situation about religion, and all these issues which involve religion, which we are afraid to take care of. But we're going to do it one day or the other, because we have to do it one day or the other. We may run as much as we feel, but we can't run but so far. I think Joe Louis was the one who coined the phrase, you may run wherever you want to, but as long as you stay in this ring, you got to deal with me. And as long as you stay in the ring of competition with respect to what's going on in the continent of Africa, you must bring the religion to the common table. Africa did not deal with religion as a force in which one country will fight another country when it was by itself, as one continent. It allowed religious people to constantly struggle with their problems, whatever they were, because they were not problems to be solved per se. It is when the foreign forces outside of Africa brought in their religion of conquest, whether good, bad, or indifferent, their religion which insisted that you must take this religion on. If you want to take on a religion that has God in it, then you have to take on the religion of the foreigner. We have religions of foreigners in Africa, and the religions of the foreigners are one that insisted that their God is the correct God. I was caught by that religion, or by one of those religions. because they have many religions with that aspect. We have every one of the major Asian religions that are now in Asia causing a lot of havoc. Every one of them are causing a lot of havoc in Africa at present. Let's take the one that we are most familiar with, the one of Judaism. I was born in the Hebrew faith, the Hebrew religion. I practiced that religion in various stages as I started to come to my manhood. And by the time I got to my manhood, I dumped it. Because it had become very hard for me to carry. It no longer made sense. It was confusing the issue. It had become, and in such a manner, I had to fight it. As I left that, and I left that not in a pleasant manner. I left that in a manner whereby when I was searching to find the truth, the answers which I needed to make myself an entire man, I had to go back with the aid of my father. At the time, I had just married. I was a young man with a young child, a young daughter, my first child, and a wife. My father had agreed to take the responsibility of raising my wife and child until I returned from the continent. I could have avoided going there in that condition. I should have done it before I got married. It would have been that much better. As a result, I had to cut off myself from quite a lot of things that could have happened. Nevertheless, I started it. But while I was there, I came in conflict with Mohammedanism, what otherwise today called Islam. I came in conflict with other Asian religions. I came in contact with Shintoism. I came in contact with the religion of India. The worship of goddess Hathor, I should say the reincarnation of the goddess Hathor in a different form. I came in contact with all kinds of religious forces conflicting the teachings that were important to my life in Egypt, when I should have been going out to defend the faith of the African people from an African perspective. I could no longer defend it in such a manner because I had it in my back, I had it around in my front, I had it at my side, religions that were not African to use as means of fighting against those that were Africans. That is the problem all of us have found ourselves now, and that's why the struggle for African freedom have become that much more exhausting on the African. And how do we fight this? South Africa today is a good example of it. When many of us were here thinking many days, and I don't mean in this particular location here, in this church, but in the city where we are, constantly coming, giving our maximum support that we have, particularly to the PA, supporting Dr. Eccles and others, related, not understanding the depth to which the corruption in that institution went on. Within seconds, when it just seems as if success had been able to come to the African people, we thought that the organization was splintering from the outside, but in fact it was splintering from the inside. Within less than a month, Dr. Pickles was barred from his own institution. His own institution had locked him out. Let's deal with it. that he had to return to South Africa a victim, literally a victim of the forces of the NAACP of South Africa. You probably may not understand who is the NAACP of South Africa, but I can't understand how you wouldn't understand me. Because you've dealt with the NAACP of South Africa every day. You have different names for such organizations. And you know that the NAACP of South Africa is the one that's supposedly running South Africa today. The one headed by Nelson Mandela. And I don't think you need any identification of what is the NAACP of South Africa. Because the NAACP of South Africa has run South Africa in terms of being the under organization and still remains the under organization. Because you feel that now, the proof is you're finished, you're not doing anything about South Africa. You are not doing anything about South Africa. I stood here all night this evening and heard nothing about South Africa. So it must be that in your opinion, it's all over. And it may be all over in context to what you were talking about. Because you're telling me, or at least I'm made to understand, that Mandela is the president of South Africa. And that's worse than I've been made to understand almost anything else. Because if there's any news in South Africa or in Africa period that is disturbing, it is the one that Mandela is at all president of anything in South Africa. I mean, that is the culmination to the speech that I intended to give tonight. Mandela being the president of a country in South Africa, let us examine what is Mandela doing. Right today, the Pope is supposed to come to South Africa in the coming week, and he is in Africa already, and he's come to South Africa, and Mandela is preparing, and I don't need to know what preparation he needs to be able to speak to the Pope, because they had already rehearsed this meeting. They had rehearsed this meeting 5 years before Mandela became, quote-unquote, president of South Africa. He is the president of South Africa with no power over the finances of South Africa. The president of South Africa with no power over the landmass of South Africa. No power over the armed forces of South Africa. And I could continue and ask the question, what is he the president of in South Africa? He's not the president of the people, because he's not the president of the white people of South Africa. He's not even the president over the national anthem of South Africa, because there is no one national anthem in South Africa, there is two. If you decide to sing one, you must sing the other.
That's right.
He is not the president of anything in South Africa other than to write a constitution that must be voted upon for the benefit of all people. But 1/3 of all the people in the land have the control that if they voted no, it is no. The other 2/3, it will have no value. And that's another worrisome point in South Africa. As a matter of fact, Southwest Africa is in a 100% better position than South Africa, though they are in a hell of a position themselves. And it all comes because Sudan has blocked our news coming from any part of that area, and it is blocking it now. Sudan played blocker against us with respect to Israel when the Israelis were dealing with Ethiopia and Mengistu and others, taking out thousands upon thousands of Africans out of Ethiopia to go to Israel. We could not find out what was happening. We could not hear the truthful news as we needed to hear. As a result, when we heard the news, it was the end of the news. And over 10,000 Africans had been taken from Ethiopia and carried to Israel. They call them the Beta Israel, or Ethiopian Jews. And now today, as we await for the cry of the African Jews, the general term used today, Palasha, the people they once called Palasha, the people who call themselves Beta Israel, children of the house of Israel. We will hear that blast. When that blast comes, what are they going to tell the world? We are being mistreated by Jews? Is that what they're going to tell the world? They're not going to tell the world anything new. They have been saying that forever, and they're still saying that. 1947, they were saying that then. When Israel was made a nation by Harry the Wisp Truman. Oh, we have such short memories. You know, but I don't have a short memory because I write them down in my books. So that when the time comes and you start to say your different little thing, I show you in the book. I had told you here it is. But history is to remind us of those things which we thought nobody would remember when we have done it so bad that we cannot avoid it anymore. As we look at the world of Africa today, and that's what I'm examining, the world of Africa today, and why is it as is. We must look at it in terms of what South Africa means to Israel. South Africa means to Israel what it had meant to Israel for years. Nothing new. Israelis are coming to Israel. Israelis from the Soviet Union, not from Israel proper. Israelis who came from the Soviet Union, the industrial capitals of the Soviet Union, who come into South Africa as a way of making their future home, are now coming. They are coming in droves, whereas Nigerians are being deported from the same South Africa. You listen or follow the international news and see how many hundreds of Nigerians are kicked out of South Africa by Mandela. Ordered out by Mandela and his group of crooks. But you can't deal with it because you don't know about it. You don't have any movement. The brothers who were with Mandela, the brothers who would join, and I told you one day, you will not see me going to South Africa. You would not see me going to the South African mission doing anything against the white South Africans there. I told you would not see me because I don't go to picket. if I go to any foreign delegation, call the police. Because I can't be there for any good at all. I can't. So it is just a matter of calisthenics for me to be there. When Mandela goes away to different places and returns to South Africa, he doesn't report to the legislature because there is no legislature for him to report. He is not under constraint by the legislature. Therefore, he reports to Harry Oppenheimer and he reports to De Beers. Those are the people to whom he reports. And people ask, why does he do it? Because those are the people he must report to. They're the ones, if they don't want him, he can't go anyplace. But you wonder, how could this happen? But you must also remember that I warned you about it. I warned you the day on Gary Bird's show. It was in the Apollo Theater. I can't forget it. And I was being interviewed by Gary Bird. And at the same moment, the news got to Gary Bird's secretary, Manifa. She passed the note of that Gary that they had just released Mandela from jail. And when Gary passed the word to me, in the presence of everyone who was there, I wasn't excited because I know he was not in jail for 5 years. When they allegedly left him leaving from Robben Island, that was the last time he saw jail. All the other time he was in his plush house. For 5 years he was in his plush accomplishment. For 5 years he was going here and there all night, doing whatever he wanted. For 5 years they're already making arrangements for his final quote-unquote liberation. And Mandela was let go with a big shebang. Everybody, Mandela is out. Everybody's so happy. And when they asked me, my comment, when Gary asked, what was my comment? Isn't it strange that they will always talk about your comment, but nobody asks me about my comment I made then? And my comment was, it would mean only one thing as I was aware. What does it mean to you? And I said then as I said now, but more so now. It means that Minnie would never have to use the pillow anymore between her legs at night, and he will not have to masturbate. That's all it meant then, and that's all it means now, and more so, because not only don't she have to masturbate, she doesn't have to do anything with him because he got rid of her. But the Chinese woman that he got, she is the one that would at least have the privilege of whatever sexual intercourse he's capable of doing. Now you got, if you got it, the funny thing about it is just that we act when people die. We are always very dutiful to the person who dies, as if the person who dies suddenly become good. But if you die as no good piece of nothing, you're a no good piece of nothing, still there. You don't suddenly become something else because you die. You remain what you die as. But with black folks, if you die now, suddenly they make you good. black folks are scared to say that Hitler's a no-good bastard. He was a no-good bastard when he died, therefore he's a no-good bastard now. He still is. He doesn't change and suddenly become good because he died. But we got this hang-up thing about don't talk bad about the dead. What you going to say about the bastard? He was no good. It was no good when he died. So how are you going to say anything going to become good about him after he's dead? He's still no good. And he gets worse instead of better each time. But we don't, you see, when he died, since we don't read anything that's going to put us to do any kind of hard studying, we are comfortable with saying, man, he's dead, let him stay dead. And no, like hell, he died a bastard. He caused enough problem to die on that. So we cannot let the bastard stay dead like that. We got to now go and say, why did he die, the bastard he died? What is it he did that made him die like that? We just don't die bastards because we did something good. We did die as bastards because we were bastards when we lived. And what was the bastardization that made our life so that we die bastards? And we're not willing to touch it. We're not willing to touch it because we are saying we do not want to deal with the life of this bastard because we have to do new research. And we don't want to research because you can't hide your dirt. Somebody else now must hide it for you. And people to hide the dirt, the scum of the dead, to hide that, those who were responsible for your life, you must have had a life very important to hide. You would have placed people in conditions that were abominable when you were alive. And so to hide what's wrong about you is going to cause so much trouble that they would prefer to obliterate what's behind your name rather than go and send a great scientist just to plow under what you have done. So we are caught with the game that we create. And I noticed that in New York, one man is now jammed up with this Brother Lambert Bratt. Brother Lambert Bratt had gotten to the point of even using the term comrade brother. Brother Lambert had become such a comrade that he denied he was any longer a Garveyite. He was now a brother that every way, and he still says to you, comrade. And as a result, he violated the code that we had established among Garveyites. No longer was he a brother, he was a comrade. And as a result of that, we had differed before in many areas, but our differing with each other had to end somewhat in a catastrophic position when he tried to make me having to defend Sudan, the current Sudani government in the north, as against slavery. And I said then, as I will say now, I have nothing in Southern Sudan to hide about slavery occurring today. Nothing. I will say. And I said it now, today. There is no slavery. As you know, slavery in Western Sudan. And I'm not talking about those who stay in New York and said so. I'm talking about a person who goes to Sudan up to this year. When I carried brothers to Sudan. And I'm not talking to Khartoum on the Nile enjoying myself on a boat. I'm talking about going 7 miles into the Sudan's desert of non-stop driving to Meroe. When I carried brothers to the Nile and carried brothers to the resting place of various brothers of Sudan. When I make my statement of anything in Africa, I make it based upon knowledge, never upon what somebody told me. It is personal knowledge that I've gone to see. And here we were in a tremendous conflict before I went away to Sudan 3 months ago. And I returned watching brothers struggling in their position of disgust as the brothers try to formulate something more. And nothing happens of it here because nothing can happen of a lie. The European American Jew who tried to project this Sudanese slavery nonsense did not try to project the European slavery nonsense of which he belonged in Boston or up in Massachusetts. And it had to die as such. It had to die because it was born, it was created in lies. That's why when Leonard Jeffries had to back off from his hard position, and I told him he was going to back off. He had to, because when people are waiting for your job, and when you take it to be religious, though you find it is not religious, but in fact secular, and you cannot back this all the way to your home, you must then give someplace. And I've made up my mind. If I can't back my struggle all the way in the presence of those with whom I struggle, then it is better that I get out of the fight. It's better that I throw in the marbles. And I agree with Brother Jeffries. I cannot go down I cannot go down the lane on my stomach. And there I must let the battle go because I cannot stand up in front of my troops as a man. And so the battle is gone. And the soldier, the general, has gone with it. It's sad. I haven't seen the brother since I am back from the continent. I came back last Sunday. Today made 8 days since I am back from Ethiopia and Egypt. And it is one of the worst time in history that I am back here. I would have preferred to return here, though I could not be shouting of any major victory we had. At least I would have been shouting of the fact that we were still holding line with the tribes. Sure, it's a sad point. It is sad to sit here these days and recant that Marcus Messiah Garvey had to give major grounds before he died. But it was equally enjoying to be able to find that there were men who took Marcus Garvey home to a Jamaica where at least he returned as a conqueror, though dead. But a home, a conqueror's burial in the tradition of what he did, but not necessarily in what those who did it with him brought him back. Not even with his wife. Wife number one, Amy Ashwood, or wife number two, Amy Jack. You see, it is hard for me to speak about these things since I have aligned my entire life with all of them. It is very difficult for me to understand the behavior of certain men because the life of Marcus Messiah Garvey and the death of Marcus Messiah Garvey is one in which I, to a major extent, place my own life. And you will always hear my enemies would say about me, they cannot agree that all that I have done, they have agreed with. That's why they are my enemies. But they know that I've done it to the best of my belief system. And that's all I expect of any man. That's why you would always hear me say, I do not agree with Martin Luther King. There are very few things that Martin Luther King say I believe in. But I respect him. I respect him because he stood on truth. Truth as he knew it. He did not lie to himself. Many people lied on him, not him on himself. I wish there were quite a lot of men I could have said that. But today, we have to look at why Sudan is still the beaten horse. Why is it that these young men in Sudan, whose age is around 40, as a rallying group. That these young administrators of a government with practically no friends at all, not even African friends, to stand behind them, are willing to go it alone with members that they can pick up any place in Africa. Isn't it sad that here a country remains practically the largest piece of real estate in Africa, and people are afraid to associate with it? Isn't it sad that in Egypt, its next door neighbor to the north, Africans calling themselves Nubians, are afraid to be associated openly with it? Now, as I bring this lecture down to an end, we have to look at ourselves as an African people, asking ourselves, are we a part of a game, or are we a part of a living struggle? If it is a game, then what we're doing may be correct. Because in the game, you change it to suit the condition if you're a good gamesman. However, if it is a struggle in which the African people is to make straight for themselves, that will turn out for the others to follow, then we are very wrong. I could tell you what I'm in. I'm not in a game. I am in a life struggle. When I die, I want to die and my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and what else may follow before I die would look at me as having set, having established, having laid down the concept of moral turpitude for my clan. I do not know what more anyone can say. I had the distinct privilege of living during the time of a man who had a tremendous impact on my growth, a man by the name of Alexander Hamilton Jackson. Labor leader, lawyer, judge of the Danish Virgin Islands that later became United States Virgin Islands. I lived under that man with a sense of dignity. He was my honorary godfather. Honorary in that he was not my biological godfather, but took me on as a godson there in the U.S. Virgin Islands of St. Croix, and taught me. Yes, my father was around, very good, they were friends. Father was also a barrister. A man who introduced me to the concept of a deity who did not ask a question because he did not believe in that type of deity. I lived along with another man by the name of Before I give this name, let me say about this man, a man who fought the United States all the way, a man who had gone to West Point, but realized his being black was not going to interfere with the struggle for nationalism in Puerto Rico. I'm speaking about Don Albizu Campo. I lived under his guidance as one of the members of the youth group. Yes. I lived under the aegis of Marcus Messiah Garvey, not seeing him in the